Paragraph 6 is transaction costs. These are basically the cost of doing the deal. There are some costs the buyer will pay. There are some costs the seller pays. To avoid confusion, this paragraph outlines which costs the buyer will pay and which the seller will pay. Buyer cost, if the buyer's getting a loan, obviously the buyer should pay for the cost of that loan. Insurance, if the buyer's doing inspections, that would be something they would pay. The title exam, where we go back and check the title to make sure there are no liens on the property. The attorney's fees for doing that search and going over that search. Then there are prepaid recurring items and non-recurring closing costs. Prepaid recurring are taxes, insurance. The non-recurring are things that are just paid once at closing. And so those could be. Actually, too, another thing the buyer can make as a closing cost is if he's contractually responsible for paying commissions. And normally, there's no set rule, but many times, the seller has agreed upon a commission that he or she will pay, and then that amount is cooperated, is the word. They cooperate with another realtor that brings the buyer to the transaction. Well, if the buyer has agreed to pay their realtor more money, and there's some seller paid closing costs there, then that can be part of those. Very confusing, doesn't happen much, but just want to know it's there. Also, the buyer has to pay any FHA allowable or VA allowable cost. We're going to talk about the non-allowable in a minute. On the other side of the coin, the seller pays for the deed, pays to have the deed recorded. If there's some problems with the title, it would be the seller's responsibility to clean those titles up. If there's a lien, if there's some type of encroachment, the seller has a mortgage, then of course they have to pay their mortgage off at closing. If they have a lien, an outstanding lien, they most likely will need to pay that if they can't get it released somehow. Sometimes somebody will release a certain piece of property from a lien. Property taxes are going to be prorated to closing. The seller, under most circumstances, is paying the commissions, and the seller, of course, will pay his or her attorney's fees. Now, we talked about allowable FHA. I just want to put everyone on notice. This contract doesn't talk about non-allowable FHA or VA. So seller, you need to know that it's quite possible that you will end up paying some other costs that you don't know about. And you say, well, I didn't agree to pay them. That's true. But there are certain costs the FHA and the VA will not allow the buyer to pay. If you just say, I didn't say I would, so I'm not, then their financing will fall through. So they'll walk away under the financing contingency. So it's probably something you want to discuss. A good way to discuss that up front is there is an addendum to this contract that discusses FHA and VA. You might want to talk to your realtor about, let's fill out that addendum, or let's look at that addendum. There are some combined costs, combined paragraph here that talks about all types of owner association costs, transfer fees, estoppel fees, and unless that box is checked there on the contract that says the seller will pay, then the buyer will pay that cost there. Final little paragraph here is talking about seller will contribute to buyer's closing cost, and it gives a dollar amount that will contribute there. That's possibly where some of the FHA and VA non-allowable costs can come from. However, the seller can agree to pay, say, $3,000 worth of the buyer's closing costs, and the buyer only have $2,500. Of course, then the seller only has to pay $2,500. Or the buyer may get a particular type loan, and for that loan, the buyer has to pay so much. So while the seller says, I'll pay up to $3,000, the lender may say, no, you can only pay $2,500. So that number can change as the deal goes through.